one's going to be around. I'm new to Reaper.
This is Reaper. This is what it looks like when you first open it up. It is primarily designed as a music editing program, so there's a couple slightly odd things at first about it that take a little bit of getting used to. The first thing is these grid lines that appear here, and it defaults to having these grids. And it basically, what this is for like snapping things in time to music. And you'll notice if you take an audio file, you can just drag it on, like any WAV or MP3 or anything like that. Is this going to focus? Let's see a little bit. How's that look, guys?
Looks good.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can take any WAV, MP3, OGG. I mean, it uses a pretty wide variety of audio files that you can actually import into the different sessions. Chances are, if you can play it, like it will import into Reaper. So I just put in this dummy WAV to illustrate. You see how it's like snapping to those grids? So the first thing that you're going to want to do when you open it is to actually turn these grids off, and you do that with this guy right up here. This little grid marker. And to make sure that they never come back ever again, if you go to File and Project Settings, and then Save as Default Project Settings, you may want to write this down. Now, let's close out this. I'm going to reopen Reaper again. And you'll see, oh, ta-da, the grid lines are gone. And that will apply with like a lot of things like that. Reaper is super customizable, so you can really sort of set things up how you prefer them. Everyone sort of develops their own workflow with this kind of thing. The other thing that this is sort of a more aesthetic thing, but it kind of bugs me a little bit how gray everything is. And in order to do that, if you right-click on the track, and you can do set track color to custom color, or random color, or whatever, and then you can make it, a nice bright color. And that's especially useful if you're doing kind of like a longer project, to actually colorize each thing.
Each track or each?
You can actually do both. You can color make different regions different colors, or you can make the whole track one color. Another thing that I really encourage people to do, and this is whether you're using Reaper or anything else, is to use as much space as you have. So you really want to maximize stuff. You can adjust the size of the track. If you move the mouse to this little area right here, you see this little double arrow. And now we can pull this out and make it as big as we want it to be. This mixer down here, again, is more useful for people who are doing more music-oriented stuff. So again, this is my personal preference. Everyone has their own personal preference. But what I'll do is pop this out, and you do that by right-clicking and selecting Dock Mixer in Docker. 95% of the time, if you want to do something, you can just right-click on something and bring up a context menu like this. So what that does is it pops out the mixer into this separate window, and now we can sort of like resize this, kind of move it over to the side. So now we can use even more space. And there's lots of little resizing things that you can do. If you poke around, you can discover. Everything seem clear so far?
Yeah.
All right. So on each track, you have a bunch of different buttons and displays. You can see this meter right here will tell you what the volume is like.
We're listening to the Vocalo mixtape. Your story.
So you can see how that works. This guy right here is very, very helpful because that will show you exactly where it's peaking at. And as you may know, or hopefully you all know, we level everything to negative 12 dB. And you'll notice this is negative 12.1, so it should be around that area. You can also adjust the volume here. You can do panning if you really want to, but that's a little fancier. You can solo the track, which means it only plays that one track. Or you can mute the track, in which case it will play all the other tracks, but it will mute that one. You can also add effects and envelopes, which I'll get into in a little bit, but that's the basics of each track. In terms of regions, in terms of dealing, like each one of these things is called a region, and if you want to make an edit, you have to splice up the regions to make those edits. And so to do that, you click where you want the splice to happen, and you hit the S key, and it basically splits this one region into two regions. But this is based off of those old reel-to-reel splicing. You would actually literally cut the tape. So it's a very similar action to that. So if we want to actually, let's say we want to edit out this part here, you would splice over here, and now we have three regions, and now we can just delete this region here. Now what happened here when I deleted it? We now have this blank space, right? Now we could move this over like that, or if I undo here, we can also have this function called auto ripple, which is this button right up here. And auto ripple is super duper handy. This is probably the thing you're going to be using the most in terms of like these buttons up here. What auto ripple does is, it's better illustrated than anything else. So this is now on. I have this region selected, and when I hit delete, it now glues these two together automatically, right? How many Pro Tools people are in here? 1, 2-ish. So in Pro Tools there's a thing called shuffle. It's sort of similar to that, but what auto ripple does is instead of snapping all of the different regions together, it moves all of them together. So let's say we have these three regions, and I click on this first one, and auto ripple's on. They're now all going to move together. But it only moves the stuff to the right. If I take this second track and I move it, that first region is going to stay stationary in the second, and this second two are going to move around. Does that make sense? Whereas if we take auto ripple off, each region moves independently of all the other regions. You'll also notice, maybe you already noticed, when you take a region and move it over another region, it will crossfade between the two regions. It will essentially fade one out and fade the other one up. And that's a really good way to smooth out any kind of edits that you're making. And in general, even when you have auto ripple on and it sort of snaps things together, it's always a good idea to at least crossfade it a little bit. Because otherwise you'll really hear those edits. They'll really come through. You can also have your audio fade out. or fade in. And you do that by taking the mouse, moving it all the way up in the corner here until you see this little symbol, and click and drag over. This is now a fade. This is really good for, especially if you're using like some kind of music bed or something like that. You can actually fade things out that way. And then finally, the other tool that you have is if you take the mouse and you move it to the edge, you get this little symbol pops up, and that's the trim tool. And that will allow you to just cut off kind of the ends of things. The really nice thing about the trim tool, though, is that it's non-destructive. So let's say, oh shoot, I trimmed too much off.
Hey guys,
I can just pull it back, like that. And that works in other contexts too. Like let's say I go and I edit out this section here. Even though I didn't trim that out, I actually just deleted it, I can still take this trim tool and it's back. Does that make sense? All right. Those crossfades, by the way, going back very quickly, this sort of crossfade behavior happens when you have auto crossfade on. I almost never take this off, but if you do take this off, it will just overlap like this. See that? So then your other buttons here are that's for groups. I won't go into that for now. This is move envelope points, and yeah, I'll just talk about envelopes. Can anyone tell me what an envelope is? Anyone? Jesse, surely you know.
Well, I know what it does. I don't know what the proper definition is. I know it's the underlined volume level. Is that what it is? And you can kind of make points and drag it down and drag it up. I know that, but I don't know what it's.
Yeah.
What the proper.
Well, that would specifically be a volume.
Okay.
envelope.
Okay.
But you can create envelopes for any kind of data point, really. I mean, whether it's like an effect, you can turn an effect up and down. Primarily, we use it for volume control, and it's really just sort of like the way it's basically a line. I'll just show you. So ENV stands for envelope. We hit envelope. We get these options here. So volume is our favorite one. We use that a lot. And so it pops out this sort of like secondary track here, right? And there's this weird little green line here. And what is this? So we can move this green line like this, up and down, and that will just move the envelope. That will just change the volume across the entire track. Yeah?
Could you create like waypoints and then increase volume gradually?
Yes, so I'm going to show you that right now. You can also, if you hold down the shift button, you get this little arrow, and if you click, you get a little point there. If you click again over here, you get another little point. Click over here, here, like that, and you can just. And this is basically the volume is very high, and then it goes down, and then it comes back up. So it would sound like, maybe I'll make it a little more extreme. So this would sound like this.
Only on 89.5 FM. Vocalo.org. Real life radio.
Right, so that's what it sounds like. I'm always hesitant to show people envelopes because it's very, very easy to get lost in them and to get really anal about, okay, well, this thing spikes up here, so I'm just going to bring it down like this, and get very, very intricate with it. you really want to make envelopes as stupid as possible, right? You want it to be like, okay, this area is way is much louder, so I'm going to bring that down, and this area is quieter, so I'm going to bring it up. But you don't want it to be like super intricate. You want it to be like a whole section. You have a question?
Yeah, you got rid of the.
Oh yes, so that's
really
Alt and click is to get rid of the points. And as long as we're talking about that, so Shift is to add points, Alt is to remove them, and then if you hold down Control, you can actually just draw them like this. It's kind of cool.
Could you
Oh,
play
wow.
it and draw at the same time? Could you play it with the track? And
I think you could in theory, but there might be some lag, so it might not be super accurate, especially on an older computer that we use here. I would do the point and then play it back and then
Okay.
adjust it accordingly.
so what was that? To do a wave thing?
So that's Control
Okay.
and click and drag. But in general, I'm just going to clear this envelope. In general, like what your envelope points should end up looking like is something like that. In general, you really want to keep it super simple. If, let's say, there's like a big spike, like someone claps or coughs, and it's like much, much louder, then you can make something that looks like this. But again, super simple, straightforward. You don't want it to look like if you get into this sort of stuff, it's going to be really problematic.
Can I ask, how
Yeah.
well do those points follow the edits that you make to the audio track? So once you start cutting stuff, you've already done some
Yes, so that gets back to this button here, and that's basically, I forget what it's called, but it's the envelope points follow the regions. So if you take this off and we move this around, the envelope points are stationary. Put this on, and then there's like a little bit of weirdness, but
Yeah. What's the name of the button that you
That's
play?
the envelope?
That's the envelope button?
that is that's this button.
Okay.
Let's
Yes.
say you're multi-track, you have a lot going on. If you click that X, does it it visually goes away, but it doesn't?
When you click the X, it gives you an option. You can hide the envelope, and then if we bring the envelope back, so you can see that this is still X'd out,
Okay.
but it's this, it says it's not visible, so if you hit visible, you still have all of that sort of stuff. But you can do clear envelope if you want to scratch what you just did and start over. That's also an option as well. And then you also have this option to move it into the media lane, which I don't really do that much, but if you come from Pro Tools, you might be used to this more. If you haven't moved in media lane, then it's actually on the track. Some people like that.
Yeah.
And again, like if you want to move back, right click, show envelope in lane. So that is envelopes. All right. Effects. Effects tend to take a little bit of getting used to. And I may, in a couple of weeks, offer sort of a more advanced tutorial on how to use compression and stuff like that. But to insert an effect on a track, you hit this effects button, and then you have a ton of effects to choose from. What we primarily use is compression, so I'll just put compressor on here. This is the standard Reaper compressor that comes with it. But you'll notice it automatically takes any of the effects that are on that system. So if you happen to have like a MacBook or something that has GarageBand on it, and you install Reaper, you'll see all those GarageBand effects will appear in Reaper.
And you can use them.
And you can use them, yeah. Or in this case, you can see all these. There's the Sony track compressor, so that came from Vegas. So you might not, if the computer doesn't have Vegas, you don't see this. Okay, so here's the regular compressor. And I'll go into compression at a later date, but that's basically how you would add that effect. And
Sorry, what exactly? I don't know what that does.
compressor. It's what the name sounds like. Like
Okay.
it compresses things.
Right.
So, so you'll notice that like this audio file that I imported. This is something I worked on. You notice how like kind of flat it is.
Mm-hmm.
That's because it's been compressed.
Oh, okay.
And it sort of squashes the sound
Okay.
down a little bit and makes it kind of more consistent.
Okay.
If you don't use any kind of compression, then oftentimes, like especially with the human voice, which is quite dynamic, it will get very loud and then very soft. If someone's like listening in a car or something like that,
You're right. You have to keep it.
they'll have to keep adjusting the volume, or
Right.
they'll be like, "Oh, what was that? I didn't hear that."
Okay.
Is that the same term for normalizing, just the same?
No, normalizing is what's the best way to describe normalizing? Normalizing is when you tell it to normalize something, it looks at the audio file, it looks at what is the loudest point in that audio file. So let's say the loudest point, if 0 decibels is the loudest point, and then it goes negative from there, right? Let's say the loudest point is negative 10 decibels, so it's like 10 decibels below the top, right? So it just goes through and it identifies that point. It's like, okay, that peak is at negative 10, so I'm just going to bump up the entire track by 10 decibels. And that's what normalization does. It just increases the volume. So this track right here, this region, this has been
Compressed.
the peak. It's been compressed. It's peaking at negative 12.
Okay.
So if I want to normalize this, I right click on it and do item processing, and then normalize, and you'll see now it's way louder. And now it's using the full range
Okay.
of like it's almost like the potential of the audio file is like a canvas, right? And the audio itself is the painting that's within that canvas. And oftentimes you want to really use that full canvas so you can really see what you're doing. So yeah, that's something I should have gone over before. It's often a very good idea when you're importing audio to normalize it before you do anything else,
Okay.
because it will allow you to see it better. And yes.
So why would you like turn off the normalizing once it's done, or how would you do?
Well, you wouldn't want to turn it off. What you would want to do, again, because we set things to negative 12 decibels.
Okay.
When you're done
Oh, okay.
with your whole editing session, you would then, like, you could take the master
Right. Okay.
control and fade this down by about negative 12 dB, right? And again, double check to make sure that it's hitting the right points and everything. All right, so when you're done with your session, we've made this, look at this beautiful session we've made. So, I want to turn this into a single wave file. I've set it so that it's negative 12 decibels, and I've like played it through and made sure that it's not peaking too much. And now I want to render it. First, we have to select the area that we want to have rendered. And if you go on any of this gray space or any of this space up here, where the numbers are, you click and drag, and you get this sort of like white screen. And you can adjust this as well, so that, like, this would be bad if you were to render this, because you would end up with a couple seconds of silence at the end here, right? So, try to be as precise as possible, and then you do File, and Render. And number one thing to watch out for, it defaults to render entire project. So if this is selected, it will render all of this, not just what you've selected, but the whole project.
Meaning like all the silence, like at the,
Right. So
all of that. Okay.
like for instance, so in this case, see there's these like weird data points hanging out here. If we were to render that entire project, it would render all of this, and then we would get all this silence right here. Because basically it just goes through, and it's like, when you tell it to render the entire project, it goes through, and anytime if there's any kind of information, it just assumes, okay, the project is still going on.
I see.
So it's going to read this and be like, okay, this is still part of the project.
Okay.
So it's always a good idea, so again, File, Render, you want to do Render Time Selection.
And there's no way to permanently change that default.
Not that I know of, but I may look into that.
It seems like it saves it. For most of the time I use it, it just seems
Yeah,
to
it seems like it
saves it.
saves
Really?
it
Yeah.
after a while.
Yeah.
It doesn't.
I don't know why, but it does.
It does within multiple. If I have one session and I'm rendering multiple things within that session, it will revert back to this. But and in general, all of this information is going to be default to be how we want it. So 44.1, we want it to be stereo. Oh, here's something, yeah, so we want it actually to be 16-bit. Although it's not the end of the world if it's 24-bit. And that's basically it. So then you hit render, and you get this. This is also a really good way to just make absolutely sure that you haven't gone well above negative 12, right? Yeah, especially if it's a longer file, you'll actually see it rendering as it happens. Also, I just want to give a plea to be as organized as possible with your sessions. And I think when the number one issue that people have when they're starting out is they won't keep all of their audio and all of their Reaper sessions or Vega sessions or whatever kind of in the same spot, right? Because when you import an audio file into this session, it's not like that audio file is now in that session. It's just referenced in that session, right? The way that I like to think about it is Reaper or Vegas or whatever you're editing with is like a conductor. And all the audio files are the different instruments. And if the conductor's in a different room from the instruments, there's not going to be any music that's made. So the number one thing, whenever you're starting a new project or a new session, you want to practice really, really good file management. So create a new folder, call it something descriptive, test session. Room 40. And then anything, any piece of music, any bit of an interview or like a man on the street interview that you've done, put it in here first before you do anything